Hi everybody and welcome back to the live webinar here at weBINAr. So we're 3 days away from Purim, less than 3 days away from Purim, and of course we all want to know what to do and how to do it, especially on this special, unique day of Purim. So I thought that we would spend the next 15 minutes quickly doing a quick revision, a brief revision on the laws of Purim. Generally speaking, there are 4 mitzvot, there are 4 commandments that are done on Purim. The first one is, of course, to read the Megillah. What that means is to read or hear the Megillah being read from a kosher Megillah scroll, which means it has to be written by a scribe with a feather and ink on parchment, just like the Torah scroll is written. We read the Megillah by day and by night. The obligation is to hear both. Now, when we read the Torah regularly, the halacha is that if you missed a word here and there, you still fulfilled your obligation. However, the one reading the Torah has to make sure to read every single word inside the actual Torah scroll and not by heart. Even if in theory, the one who's reading the Torah knows the whole parsha by heart, nevertheless, he has to actually read it within the scroll. Every single word in the scroll. The Megillah is actually the opposite. If the one who's reading the Megillah reads a few words by heart, as long as it's not too many, you still fulfill the obligation. However, you need to hear every single word of the Megillah. And therefore it is of utmost importance that those hearing the Megillah should be absolutely quiet and pay attention to hear every single word being read by the Bal Koira, by the one who is reading the Megillah. For this reason, because even missing one word will make the entire reading Megillah invalid, for this reason one should try and look inside in a kosher Megillah themselves, even if you're not reading the Megillah out loud, but nevertheless it is the best thing to do to follow inside, if one can, in a kosher Megillah and actually read the whole thing to yourself, so as not to miss a word. If you do not know how to read the Megillah yourself, or you only have in front of you a printed chumash or a printed Megillah with the words in front of you, then do not read the whole thing inside to yourself, rather hear from the person who is reading from a kosher scroll. However, if you miss a word, 1 or 2 words, then you can read that word within the chumash, because when you read from a printed version of the Megillah, it's as if you're saying it by heart. It's as if you're not reading it. So therefore, a few words here and there is okay. However, most of the Megillah you should just listen to the Bal Koira, to the one who is reading the Megillah. The best way to hear the Megillah is with a minyan, meaning a quorum of 10 men in the room, because then it's done publicly. You're publicizing the miracle publicly. In general, it's good. B'roivam hadras melech, the glory of the king is when it's done publicly. Therefore, that's the best way to hear the Megillah, with a minyan. However, if one can't make it to shul or one can't get together a minyan, you have still fulfilled your obligation by hearing the Megillah, even if there's only one person in the room, even if you're just reading it for yourself. However, of course, if you're reading it for yourself, you have to make sure that you know how to read it, because if you read the words wrong, then again, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. There are 3 blessings recited before the Megillah, both by night and by day. Those blessings are Asher Kiddush. The first one is Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah, that God has commanded us to read the Megillah. The second blessing is, after of course Baruch Atah Hashem, she'asa nisim la'aviseinu b'yamim hahem mizman hazeh. We make the same blessing when we light the menorah, that God has performed miracles for us at this time. And the third blessing is, of course, the Shechiyonu blessing, which is made when we do a mitzvah, which only comes once a year or from time to time, to thank God for keeping us alive and sustaining us, that we have the merit to fulfill this mitzvah. If you are listening to the Megillah from somebody else, you should answer Amen to those blessings, but do not answer Baruch Hu, Baruch Shmoi, which we say sometimes when we hear a blessing of somebody else, because you are fulfilling the obligation you're actually listening to the blessings, and as if you're saying it, therefore you should not say Baruch Hu Baruch Shmoi, but say Amen. If the Megillah is read with a minyan in the room, then there's an additional blessing said at the end of the Megillah, Harav Esrivenu, which thanks God for performing all these miracles. If you're reading the Megillah without a minyan, you do not make that blessing. During the daytime, when you hear or make the Shechiyanu, the third blessing, you should have in mind that Shechiyanu is not only going on the reading of the Megillah, but is going on all the other mitzvahs of Purim, like we will discuss what they are, because we don't make a separate Shechiyanu for them. We rely on the Shechiyanu which we make on the Megillah, and that then goes on the rest of the mitzvahs. The next mitzvah, the next commandment is Matanos la'avyonim. It's always a mitzvah to give charity. However, on Purim it's especially important. We are obligated to give charity to minimum two poor people. Preferably, it should be done in a way that the money actually reaches the poor person on the day of Purim. If that is not possible, then at least one should separate charity for two poor people on the day of Purim itself. Then comes the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot, of sending gifts of food to at least one person. This gift has to contain two different foods, at least two different foods. And since the original point of this commandment was that people should have food to eat by the meal of Purim, which is the mitzvah which we're going to discuss soon, therefore the way it was set up is that the foods actually have to be edible and ready to eat right away. So if you were thinking of sending frozen chicken as your shalach manos this year, perhaps think again, because that is not good shalach manos. Perhaps a ready-made kugel would be a better idea. The custom is to try and use actually somebody else as a messenger to send your shalach manos. So when Ruvain sends to Shimon, Ruvain should use Levi as a shliach, as a messenger to take his mishloach manos to Shimon. The reason for this is because the pasuk, the verse in the Megillah says mishloach manot, which means to send gifts. Generally, when you send something, it means you're sending it through somebody else. However, if you don't do that, you still fulfill the obligation, no problem. The way this is done is that it's done from a man to a man and a woman to a woman. That is the way it is set up. That is the way it's supposed to be done. And that is the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos. Then, of course, comes the fourth and most exciting mitzvah, which that is the highlight of Purim, the festive Purim meal. According to most halachic authorities, the way you actually fulfill the obligation of having a Purim meal is through washing and eating bread. Bread is what makes a meal a true meal. Many authorities say that one should try and eat meat during this meal. It's brought down in Jewish law that one should try light candles during this meal. In other words, it should be a true festive meal befitting the festivities and the happiness of Purim. All of these mitzvahs need to be done by day, besides from Megillah, which is also read at night, but then read again by day. So you read the Megillah also by day. It has to be done during the day. That includes the meal. The meal has to at least be started during the daytime. In Jewish law, it says that one should try that most of the meal should be eaten during the day. If one wishes to continue and bring the meal into the night after Purim, that's fine and that's a good thing. And there's no limit to when you need to end, but you do need to start and have most of the meal before it gets dark. Of course, during the meal, as we've mentioned in the previous webinars, there is a mitzvah to say l'chaim, of course, in a healthy way, of course. But the idea is, of course, as we discussed, to celebrate the great joy of Purim, to celebrate being a Jew, to celebrate our connection to God. These are the four requirements that we are required to do on Purim. This applies both to men and women without exception. There are some other things which we need to know about the next couple of days. First of all, today is the fast of Esther, which is commemorating the fast that the Jews fasted at that time when they went to war to pray to God that they should be successful. The custom, besides for fasting on times Esther, is that before mincha, before the afternoon prayer, one gives what's called machzis hashekel. Machzis hashekel means a half a shekel. Obviously, we live in Australia, and our currency is not a shekel, our currency is $1, and therefore the custom is to give 50 cents to charity. The reason for this is that in times of old and temple times, once a year, they would collect a tax of a half a shekel from every single Jew that would go towards the communal offerings, the daily offering that was brought in the temple on behalf of all the Jewish people. What would pay for that is that once a year they would collect a tax of a half a shekel from every single Jew, and therefore to commemorate that, which this was done during the month of Adar, therefore to commemorate that, on Tainus Esther, the custom is to give 50 cents, a half of whatever currency you live in, whatever currency country you live in, to give a half of that currency to charity. This Shabbos, besides for being a day before Purim, is also Shabbos Zohar. There is a biblical commandment once a year to remember the wicked nation of Amalek and the fact that we are commanded to destroy them. The way this is done is that besides for the regular Torah portion, which is Parshas Tetzaveh, which we're going to read this Shabbos, we add on an additional portion which is called Zohar, which speaks about the commandment to remember Amalek. According to most opinions, this is a biblical commandment, a commandment from the Torah. According to most opinions, this applies to both men and women, and therefore everyone should try to be in shul this Shabbos to hear from the Torah this special parsha of Parsha Zohar. And of course, again, the commandment is to hear it, and therefore it's of utmost importance that it remains quiet. Another number of things which happen on Purim, during the prayers on Purim, both in Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, we add in a paragraph called Al HaNisim. We do this as well when we bench, when we do the after blessing after the meal. This paragraph talks about and thanks God for the miracles which He did for us on Purim. Of course, a custom on Purim is to dress up, as something. The idea behind this is, besides for, of course, increasing joy, there are many reasons behind this. One of the reasons is that Purim was a hidden miracle. It wasn't a supernatural miracle in a clear way. There was no splitting of the sea, no 10 plagues. It was just a chain of events that one thing led to another. Of course, it was a miracle, but it was a miracle disguised within the rules of nature, and therefore to commemorate that, we disguise ourselves in a costume. Another reason why we dress up is because originally the way it used to work, poor people used to go around on Purim and collect charity. As we said, it's a mitzvah to give charity. In fact, it says that on Purim, whoever stretches out their hand to take money, you shouldn't ask whether they're legitimate, not legitimate, you should give them money on Purim. And we're told that if we act that way, God will act to us that way, that whatever we ask for Him, He will fulfill. So since poor people used to go around and collect charity, that could be very embarrassing, and therefore everyone used to just cover themselves up. No one can tell who's who, and therefore there would be no embarrassment involved in collecting charity. The bottom line is this: at the end of the day, our connection to God comes from, first and foremost, doing His commandments. Although Purim is a festival and there's a lot of joy and happiness, but the only way that can truly be done in a true way, the only way that could be done in a way that connects us to God, is to actually, practically, physically fulfill the commandments that God tells us to do on these days, these 4 mitzvahs of hearing the Megillah, giving gifts of food to another person, giving charity to at least two poor people, and eating a festive meal. That is the way that we will truly experience the joy, the infinite joy that Purim can provide in our lives. And God should bless all of you with a happy Purim, a Purim that will inject into your life true happiness that will last throughout the entire year, all the way till the next Purim. Have a good day and happy Purim.